read the Bible through during the summer months. And so we engaged in that. We sent out a little reading guide every week that went along with the readings for the week. And we've come to the completion of that. And back when we started, I had those raise their hand who wanted to take that challenge. And I said, when we got done, I would ask you to raise your hand if you did the challenge. And so those of you who did it, will you raise your hands really high? Man, that's great. I don't know who the youngest is, but I know Hunter did the reading as well, and I don't know, you can look around and guess who the oldest one was, but I'm not going there. But I really appreciate that, and we'll try to do that again, I think, this winter, and maybe pick, something, a different reading from what we just did. But I hope that you have maybe developed some habits from that. I think that's a good thing to spend time each day in God's Word. For those of you who have been around just a little while here at Carnes, you will remember June Agee. June one time came up to me after a sermon. She grabbed me by the arm and she said, "You've got to stop using that word." And I said, "What word?" And she told me what it was, which is a perfectly fine American English word. June was from England, and she had a little bit of a different vocabulary than we do in America. And by her British English, what I was saying was very offensive to her. And she explained it to me, and I didn't know, and I apologized, and I've never used that word again for her. But sometimes words have meanings, and we need to understand, if I don't know what I'm saying, I might be offending somebody. But beyond that simple illustration, there are some big words in the Bible that we don't use in our everyday language. We've got sanctification and mortification and propitiation and expiation and all these words that you can read on the screen there. Imputation. What in the world is all that? All those words are used in the Bible and have reference to our salvation. And it would become incumbent upon us to learn what those mean. Because after all, we're not just dealing with maybe hurting June's feelings at the time. We're talking about things that could hurt God's feelings if we don't understand and do these things right. And so I want to take 3 words this morning that are kind of big words and lay them out for us so that we can understand. But I'm going to do it in the context of the greater word salvation. Salvation is a process that involves at least three ways that I want to discuss with you today. When we talk about the plan of salvation, and salvation, are you talking about like salvation here and now? Are you talking about that eternal salvation? Or are you talking about all of it? There are some things from which and for which God has saved us that involve 3 of those big words on the screen. And so I want to share those with you today. But let's start with this. The Bible teaches us that Jesus, our Savior, has saved us from our past sins, right? In Mark 16 and verse 15 and 16, Jesus said, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He who believes and is baptized shall be saved." Now, that's salvation from past sin. That's not talking about heaven. You do know that, right? I mean, there's a distinction to be made, because if I'm, there are people who have been baptized and received salvation, but they choose to live an unholy life. And they forfeit that eternal salvation in heaven. They may have at one time experienced salvation from past sins, but Mark 16 isn't guaranteeing that you'll go to heaven if you're baptized. It's guaranteeing that your past sins will be forgiven. Can I give you some examples of that? I mean, we're not talking about eternal salvation because the Bible teaches us that, well, let's take Acts chapter 1. And there was an apostle who had just hung himself. His name was Judas. He was numbered among them, but he lost his way. Judas was in a saved relationship at one time, but he forfeited that as he went through his life. In Acts 8, there's Simon who was baptized, and he is forgiven of his past sins, but Simon continues a wayward life. And Peter says, man, you are in the gall of bitterness, and you have no lot or part in this matter, of going to heaven. And he was in a lost condition, and he had to repent and pray. He had lost his way. Oh, he had been saved from his past sins, but that didn't guarantee his eternal salvation, right? He could have forfeited that. In Galatians 5 and verse 4, the Bible, when Paul was writing to the church of Galatia, he says, you know what? Let me tell you, if you go back and try to keep the old law, which some of you are trying to do, you're going to fall from grace and be estranged from Christ. You're not going to heaven if you're estranged from Christ. And if you fall away from grace, you're not going to heaven. But these are people who had been baptized. They had been forgiven of their past sins, but they were in jeopardy of losing their eternal salvation because of their conduct. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 27, Paul, who had made such great sacrifice to the cause of Christ, you remember he says, I even have to discipline myself, lest I should become a castaway. Paul had been forgiven of his past sins, his persecution of the church and all those things that he had done, but he didn't have, that didn't stamp his ticket to heaven, his eternal salvation. We can look again in 2 Timothy 4 and verse 10, where Paul is writing of some of his companions, and he said, and Demas. He was a faithful brother in Colossians, but now when he writes 2 Timothy, he says, Demas has forsaken me, having loved the present world. So here's a man who was once a brother. He had been baptized, had received the remission of his past sins, but that's no guarantee of heaven because his wayward life took it away from him. And then you can also look at, what Jesus talks about, John 15. I'm the vine, you're the branches. We have to be connected to Christ, and we have to bear fruit, or we'll be disconnected from Christ. We'll be pruned off. And so there's that concept of abiding in Christ to end up with salvation. So what we have in Mark 16 is salvation from our past sins. If you look at your back, look past in your life, and you've made a lot of mistakes. You've committed a lot of sins. And I say that, and I may not even know you, but I know that to be true because we're human. And we've all fallen short of the glory of God. And if you want to be free, rid of all those past sins, you need to do what Jesus says in Mark 16, in verse 16. You need to believe and be baptized, and you'll be saved from all of those past sins. What that is talking about is this big word, justification. That's what that word means. You have changed your legal standing before God. When you have been baptized into Christ, all of those past sins are forgiven, and you now stand justified before God. He's not ever going to hold those against you anymore. They've been forgiven and wiped away, and now you stand in a new state. Before you were condemned, and now you are justified. And we've often made a play off of that word, justification. What does that mean? Well, it's just as if I'd never sinned. That's how God views you. He views you as holy, legally upright. Okay, so that's one part of salvation. But that doesn't get me to heaven yet. because there's still life that has to be lived. And so I want the salvation from my past sins, and I hope you do too. And if you haven't done what Jesus said to do to get that, I hope you'll do that this morning. Right here's water, and we can take care of that and God will forgive you of all of your past sins. But then what? That brings us to the next thing in our salvation process. And God, Jesus, our Savior, has saved us from the power of sin. And we see that in Romans chapter 6 and verse 12. If you have your Bible, go ahead and open that to Romans chapter 6 and verse 12. These are people who have been baptized. You start the chapter and you remember he talks about how that we have been buried with Christ in baptism and we have risen to walk in newness of life. And he's talking to those who have done that. And here's what he says to those who have been forgiven of their past sins. He says, do not let sin reign in your mortal body that you should obey it in its lusts. Rather, what he tells us to do in verse 14 and tells us the way we should live, he says, for sin shall not have dominion over you, for you're not under law but under grace. When we have obeyed the gospel and received the forgiveness of our past sins, we begin a process called sanctification. A process of becoming holy and working at being more and more like God. And don't deny and don't reject and don't forget about this important part of our salvation. Sin is no longer to have dominion over us. Oh, we'll still struggle with it. We'll still mess up from time to time. But it's not the rule in your life. You're living your life in a different way and for a different master at this point. And that's sanctification. And sanctification has the idea of holiness connected to it. And you know, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, I think it's verse 3, I may be wrong about that, says that this is the will of God. Whenever the Bible says that, like it kind of makes me sit up and take notice. When God says, this is what I want, this is my will, and he says, even your sanctification. God wants us to be sanctified, to be holy, to be free from the power of sin. And so when we come up out of those waters of baptism, having received salvation from our past sins, we've got to start living different. We can't just be the same old man that we put to death. We're to rise in newness of life, Romans chapter 6. Titus Chapter 2, as we have been studying the book of Titus on Sunday morning in Bible class, do you remember he says, the grace of God has appeared to all men, bringing salvation, teaching us that denying ungodly lusts and worldliness and so forth will be the kind of people we need to be. But there's that denial of ungodliness and worldly lusts. We have to live differently. Grace and the salvation from our past sins teaches us now we got to start majoring in other things. I'm not so much interested in sin anymore. I need to be interested in ways that I can grow and be more Christ-like. And that becomes the focal point of our lives. We're trying to be holy people. We're trying to imitate the one who came and redeemed us and to be more like him. And you've got images of that in 1 Peter. Well, you can go to Galatians and look at the fruit of the Spirit, how we're supposed to be love, joy, peace, long-suffering, all those things listed in that passage. Those are qualities that we should have. And then you get to Peter and he talks about add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and knowledge temperance, all those things. Those are things that we're to be focusing on and making us more and more sanctified, Christ-like, holy, as we live this Christian life. And so what Jesus did in salvation is he forgave us from our past sins. when we obey the gospel and are baptized into Christ. But he's also freed us or saved us from the power of sin. It's not my boss anymore. My Lord and Master now is Jesus, and because of that, I'm into things like holiness and justice and righteousness and peace and love, and those are the qualities that I'm pursuing, trying to do on a day-to-day basis. And that is called sanctification. So justification happens when we have made that change from sinner to saint, and God has saved us from our past sins. It's a one-time act. We have been justified in His eyes. And then sanctification is the next part of my salvation. I'm to grow in holiness and the likeness of Jesus. You remember Romans 8 and verse 29? Talks about how that we need to be conformed to the image of His Son. That's sanctification. And so that brings us then to the third point. And not only have we been saved from our past sins and from the power of sin, but we will eventually be saved from the presence of sin. We won't have to deal with sin anymore. That word describes the term glorification. That's what that means and has reference to. There will come a time when sin will no longer be a part of our life. We'll no longer struggle with sin. We'll no longer struggle trying to be sanctified people because we won't have this struggle anymore. God is going to remove sin completely from us. But that doesn't happen until heaven. 1 Peter 1 and verse 9 speaks of the end of our faith. What happens at the very end? What's the result of my living a faithful life to God? He says, well, the result will be your salvation. Well, in that passage, he's talking about our eternal salvation. I've already been saved from my past sins, and I've been saved from the power of sin. But at the end of my life, the end result of my faith will be the salvation of my soul. And I'll be with God in heaven. And you know what? Have you read Revelation 21 and 22? And the description of that place? There's no more tears, no more sorrows, no more pain. The former things are passed away. Everything has become new. And he describes that city and goes into great detail trying to describe it. But one of the things he says is nothing that offends will enter into that city. You won't wake up in heaven and have to decide, am I gonna sin today or not? Sin's presence will be absent from that city. I remember the passage in Hebrews chapter 12 as the writer of Hebrews is talking about our plight, and he begins to talk about the church and that heavenly gathering of God's saints, and he says, and those are just men made perfect. They no longer have to deal with sin. They're not sinful men struggling in this life with trying to be holy and messing up from time to time and getting back on track. No, when we get there, we will be just men who have been made perfect. There's no more taint of sin and struggle with sin at that point. And again, you see that same concept in Romans chapter 8, but the point is this. When we reach the end of our faith, what will living a Christian life? Why do I need to be saved from my past sins and then begin to live this holy life for Jesus so that at the end of my life, what's it get me? Well, what it gets you is glorification. You'll be in a position and in a place where you never have to struggle with sin anymore. It'll be gone. And wouldn't you love to live in a place that has all the trappings of heaven, but also being that which you don't have to keep your door locked. Cindy had her Jeep stolen right out here in front of the church building the other day. You're not going to have to worry about, I don't think Jeeps are going to be in heaven, but you don't have to worry about Jeeps being stolen or people breaking into your home or people acting in ugly ways, and because we'll be in a glorified state, glorification, and God will save us to that kind of a life that doesn't last a week or a month, but will last throughout all eternity. That's what salvation is. And it may be more, maybe we need to look at it through the lens of those big words: justification, glorification, or sanctification, and then glorification. And maybe when we see it through the lens of those words, we better get maybe a better feel for where we are and what we've done and what we're trying to do in this life. When you repent and are baptized, you will have been forgiven of all your past sins. It gives you no guarantee of heaven. And I think by failing to understand how these words work, we have a lot of people that get baptized and they think they're done. They think they've reached the finish line, and instead of realizing this is just the beginning. This doesn't guarantee that you're going to go to heaven just because you got baptized. What it does promise you is that your past sins are forgiven, and then you begin a process of sanctification, where you live faithfully to the Lord and try to spend your time thinking on things that are noble, just, and pure. And the end of that kind of a life will result in your glorification, your eternal salvation from even the presence of sin. And that's what I want. And I hope you want that too. But you need to begin the process. If you're here this morning and you're not yet a child of God, or maybe you're not sure, you want to go to heaven, but you're not sure how to get there, well, let me remind you what the Lord said. He who believes and is baptized shall be saved. That'll change your state with God. You will at that point be justified in the eyes of God. And from that point, you need to live a holy life. You need to live your life trying to be more and more Christ-like, and that's called sanctification. You need to be a sanctified person. That's the will of God. You can't just throw that one off and say, well, it doesn't matter how I live. It does matter. And as you live your life free from the dominion of sin, when you get to the end, God will save you eternally in a glorified state where you no longer even have to struggle with sin, because he'll remove you from its presence. If you need to begin that process this morning, I hope that you'll take this opportunity. We're here to help you to be baptized into Christ and to begin your new life with him. And if you're a child of God, having already done that, I want you to understand that because you did that doesn't mean you're going to heaven. You have to live a holy life. You have to be a sanctified person. And at the end of your faith, then you receive that heavenly home. And if you don't keep the faith, then you have no promise of heaven. And so I would encourage you to repent if you haven't been living a holy life. If you've had sin continuing to reign and have dominion over you, you gotta cut free from that. And we'll pray for you to that end, that God will forgive you. But I want us all to be able to reach that end of the line, the end of our faith, and be glorified. Well, we will be like he is, the Bible says, someday. And I want us all to arrive at that point. And if you need to respond to the invitation this morning, we invite you to come to the front as we stand and sing this song of encouragement.